Hello, spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scary-ish podcast.
Woo!
And thank you for that nice toned down one. I'm Robin Grace, and this is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
And we're here to share some interesting, cool stuff with you guys.
Indeed we are. I'm really excited. I know that we weren't exactly sure what we were going to do going into the start of the day, but you picked a topic that inspired me to pick a topic. So it's basically cryptid week. We're doing cryptids. And yours is a little bit more well-known than mine. In fact, significantly more well-known.
Are they cryptids, or are they just like...
Mine is certainly a cryptid, because it's studied by cryptozoologists. Yours is like just straight-up legend. So since we're teasing it, and everyone's already seen the title of the episode, Robin, what are you covering this week?
So I'm going to do mermaids this week.
It's pretty awesome. I'm excited to hear what you got, because you have a lot. And I'm going to be covering the Mongolian death worm, and I won't say anything else about it until we get into the topic.
Also known as a tapeworm.
No, it's actually not, but
those are also horrible.
They are horrible, and I know you're going to bring up that episode of 911 where they have one come out of a guy's butt.
Oh, so gross.
I don't even want to talk about it, but yeah, super excited to get to that. Before we do, if you're looking for homegrown horrors, which are stories that you folks have sent to us, you can find those on our Storytime episodes. We record them live, and fingers crossed we're going to have a good broadcast this Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
We will test out streaming, though, tomorrow.
Indeed.
Right?
If we have problems still, we will try everything we can up until we launch to make sure it's fixed. If not, we might move the show to a later date. We'll see what happens with it. But for now, Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time at youtube.com/scarish or twitch.tv/scarishpodcast. And if you want to send your stories to us, please do. Storytime@scarish.com is our email address. Our website, scarish.com. You can also go to facebook.com/scarishpodcast. You can tweet at us at scarishpod. Instagram is at scarishpodcast. Send us messages all those different ways, and we are happy to hear it and share your story. And for those of you folks who are like, Adam, weren't you guys supposed to be going to the Winchester Mansion? We are. The date is June 9th, and coming up soon, we should all be able to buy tickets. So if you're planning on going, May 1st should be the day that the tickets for June become available, and that is the day that we will purchase them. So very, very excited to go. We have our travel arrangements booked. I have the day off from work, so it's happening. I'm very, very excited.
So... you're gonna go first, right?
I am, yeah. So this week, like I said, I was inspired by Robin's choice because she let me know she was doing mermaids, and I'm like, I kind of also want to do a cryptid this week. So I went and started looking at some of the creatures that I've researched in the past, and originally I decided that I was going to cover two of them because I didn't think one would have enough, which is kind of why I haven't done them in the past. And like I said, I'm going to be doing the Mongolian death worm, but like I said, before that, I was originally going to cover two of them, but when I was searching for new material for the Mongolian deathworm, I actually found a little bit more, and I was realizing that there's a lot to this thing that I can actually tell you folks, and by the time I was done with it, I was like, I have more than enough to cover a full topic, so I'm really happy that I revisited this, and it's going to be hopefully a fun time. So like I said earlier, this creature is lesser known than a mermaid, because I think everyone's kind of heard of a mermaid, and not so many people have heard of Mongolian deathworms. But that's just me commenting on my own bubble of existence, because like in some parts of the world, this creature's existence is common knowledge. It's not even thought of to be a myth.
I'm just thinking of all the creatures that can actually burrow into your skin and like lay babies and just do horrible, horrible things to you.
Well, this is a different creature. Those are like botflies. I think most of those are flying insects, but this is supposed to be a worm. And, well, like you guys know, I'm from the United States, and we like supposedly don't have these things here, but there is a place that does, and that place is the Gobi Desert. And while I do admit that I don't know where all of our listeners hail from, I think it's safe to say those of you listening are pretty far from the Gobi Desert for the most part.
I'm definitely not going to be gobing there.
They're just getting worse and worse, ladies and gentlemen. So, geography lesson really fast. Do you think you can locate China on a map?
Yeah.
Cool. I think most people can. If you can't, don't even worry about this part. Skip ahead 15 seconds. But I put, of course, Robin can, by the way, and it's a side note. Well,
I'm Asian.
Do you know what's north of China?
Isn't that Russia?
And I put, if you said Russia, you are right. But do you know what's between China and Russia? Mongolia, which I didn't know when I saw. Like, I know Mongolia.
We play Risk all the time.
Well, like Risk has places on there that don't exist anymore, or things that are just called different
like
things.
Kamchatka.
Exactly. I think Kamchatka actually still exists, and it's just a part of Russia.
Lol.
But that said, yeah, between China and Russia is Mongolia. So because I don't know a lot about the region, I automatically assume like if it's north of China, it's got to be cold. But I don't know much about Mongolians. I've never even seen Mulan, so who the hell knows what their land is about?
Get out.
And I feel very badly that I'm ignorant on this matter, but that is exactly where the Gobi Desert is. So it's a desert.
Right, cool.
It's a desert that is mostly in Mongolia, but is also in northern China.
But it's not like the typical desert that you see, like, say, in Star Wars, where they're going through the desert.
It's totally the typical desert. No, it's still warm. It's still really hot there, but it gets very cold at night. There's also some really weird shit there. When I was Googling the Gobi Desert, there's like a 1-to-1 replica of the Eiffel Tower in the middle of the fucking desert.
Shut up.
There's some weird shit out there, man. So it's not shocking that a place this, like, unknown to me, because everything unknown to me obviously is so mysterious, but this place is just like filled with weird stuff. And although outsiders like myself that would travel to visit or would just go to the Gobi Desert for various reasons are skeptical of something like the Mongolian deathworm, but the locals of this region are like, oh yeah, like that thing is super real. And what I thought was funny is basically all the accounts that I originally found when I was doing my original research of the worm, they make it like real in people's minds. Everyone just says like this thing straight up exists, but at the same time they're all secondhand accounts. So like next to no one's like, I've seen that thing. Like basically everyone that I read about was like, my auntie, sister's uncle's cousin totally saw one out there. It's totally real. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And I rolled my eyes. But realistically, like the accounts are not that far removed. It's usually one person saying, I know someone who saw it. And then I started reading up a little bit more, and we'll get to what I found. That said, it sort of activates my skepticism the same way outsiders are skeptic when you have a creature everyone talks about, but apparently no one has actually seen. So let's get right down to it. What do these things look like? Well, to be honest, when I first started my research, I totally pictured the graboid from Tremors.
Are you going to hit me with your best shot?
What? No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to continue your song reference to one word that I said 2 sentences ago. And a quick side note, if you don't realize, the creatures in the movie Tremors are not called Tremors, they're called graboids. They literally name them in the movie. I've talked to some people about that movie, and they refer to the creatures as Tremors. And
well, even my sister and I grew up watching Tremors, and we watched it a lot.
I've seen that movie so many times. It's so
but
good.
We were looking at a picture where somebody had drawn all the different worms.
I was thinking about that when I was doing this.
And she was like, which one's that one? I was like, from Tremors? You don't even remember?
It's the graboid, and it was the scale of like how big they get. And the graboid's like the second smallest on that scale. And then it shows the worms, the sandworms from Dune, and of course the biggest one is the giant worm from Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
I think I got those in the right order. I haven't and it's like, who the fuck knows if it's accurate?
I was like,
it's
how
just
is
a
the
meme
smallest one the one from Star Wars?
Yeah.
I was like, what?
It was the Sarlacc pit. I was
Yeah.
just like, who knows? Like, I can't remember the order that the meme went exactly, but I think we're pretty close to nailing that. But that said, I pictured a graboid when I heard Mongolian deathworm. I was very disappointed to find out that's not the case. So,
is it a lot bigger?
Scrub the image. God, I wish. Scrub the image of a graboid out of your head. Okay, so just think of a worm. Just picture a worm on the ground. Most of us have seen a worm on the ground, like after it rained. Yeah, think of an earthworm. Okay, so think of a worm that you're looking at. Stop thinking of tapeworms. Think of the worm that you're looking at, but think of it blood red. And I've seen some red worms, but I've never seen like blood red. Now think of the worm you're looking down at.
The red vines or whatever when you peel them apart.
I've never peeled apart a red vine.
Or maybe not a red vine. There's like certain licorice that you can peel apart, and it's all really thin strands. They're like a bunch of thin strands that are rolled together to
Twizzlers pulling peels?
Yeah, those.
No, that's like strawberry color. Think blood colors, like dark red. Like kind of disturbing. So think of this. You're looking down at this worm. It's that color red. And while you're looking at it, think of that blood red worm that's like the thickness of a sausage. And not just like a hot dog, like a really thick sausage. So that's pretty gross. Now, picture that sausage, blood red worm is 5 feet long.
Ew.
And 5 feet is long. Like, obviously, I was talking about dune sandworms and graboids, and those things are huge. But if you're actually thinking about this creature, like, I've seen videos of like 3 foot long centipedes, and I haven't slept at night. Now add 2 feet, make it 5 feet long. It's blood red, it's the thickness of a sausage, and drop the hideous creature on the ground in front of you and think of how it moves and writhes around. And it doesn't exactly move like a worm where it's like just inching along.
I'm sorry, but I'm getting triggered. This is like making me nauseous. It's
but
gross.
It moves more like a snake, or it kind of rolls like a roly-poly.
Snake.
So that's what's in front of you right now. And think of the fact that if this thing exists, it could just burrow under the sand or dirt and disappear. And all of a sudden that disgusting creature is gone from your sight, but it's also below your feet somewhere.
And it can sense your vibrations, so you shouldn't move.
Don't be on the rocks. It's a perfect conductor. I fucking love that movie. So while it's not graboid length, 5 feet is plenty long enough to creep me out and clearly trigger Robin. So it's a long, thick, blood-colored worm. Side note, gross. So what's kind of interesting is that a 5-foot worm isn't even the biggest type of worm. And I honestly admit I don't know too much about worms because I don't study them.
I'm starting to get to the point where the word worm is grossing me
just
out.
Sounds weird. So Australia.
Moist.
I hate you. Australia, and our listeners in Australia might attest to this and let us know if you can attest to it, has a worm that gets up to 13 feet long. 13 feet is more than twice as long as I am laying down. That's super long. That's a long worm. And Africa has a worm that has been caught and recorded at 22 feet long.
What kind of worm?
It's just a worm in Africa. I didn't look up like the actual like scientific name. I have one of those later though. As a side note to a 22-foot long worm, yuck. So if it's not super long, it's only 5 feet and it's just thick and gross looking, what makes it a quote unquote death worm? Well, it's said to be so poisonous that
it has a laser attached to its head.
It's funny because we'll get to that. There's a picture that I saw that basically makes it look like this thing has a laser in its head.
Oh my God.
It's said to be so poisonous that if you so much as touch it, you will die. You will just die instantly because it's so incredibly poisonous.
It's not going to be like Jorah Mormont where I just start turning into stone
Grayscale
slowly.
takes a long time to go through your body. This is instant death. Like, basically, when you think of this creature, and honestly, this is how I started to picture it because I was like starting to get grossed out. I think of like a villain from Mario because it kind of plays with the same principle. Like, if you touch it, you die, just like with anything in Mario. So, my advice, if you see one, jump on top of it and then eat some fucking mushrooms.
Oh my gosh.
So, I did some research on this thing to see whether or not someone has been able to document something that they consider to be real. And I found 2 works in particular that I'm going to bring up to you and describe. So this is when I started realizing I could have this as just my topic. So one of these books is called On the Trail of the Ancient Man, and it's by a man named Roy Chapman Andrews.
Was he an ancient man?
No. I mean, he's from like the 1920s. So he's old, and this book came out, I believe, in 1928 or 1922.
All right.
And the book is not a hunt for the Mongolian deathworm as the title would suggest, but it's more of a collection of his field research. And he basically ran around the world doing his best Indiana Jones impression before Indiana Jones had come out in theaters. So it's actually his life is kind of set during the time that Indiana Jones was running around. I don't think he was the inspiration for Indiana Jones, but that said, he has a lot of interesting research. He's gone a lot of different places and he's met a lot of interesting people. So at some point, he comes across the Gobi Desert and is talking to some of the locals, and the Mongolian deathworm, or MDW, as I shall call it from now on.
Thanks.
I got sick of writing that all out, but it comes up in conversation. Don't ask me how. It just does. But they're basically like, yo, dog, if you're going out to the desert, beware of the MDW. It will kill you. And Andrews is like, what's that? So they tell him the stories. They tell him about this thing. And he basically asks them, like, so you seen this shit with your own 2 eyes? And everyone there at the time was like, well, no, not me, but I know someone that has. So in this book, he basically chalks it up to being a myth. He's very skeptical about the whole thing, but he's also impressed at how much description everyone gives of the creature and how consistent the description is. But he's still just like, yeah, like, I'll be sure to keep my 3rd eye open or whatever. So shout out to Bran. The Mongolian Prime Minister. So the guy in charge of Mongolia meets with Andrews at some point, and he also brings it up to him and describes it to him and lets him know, like, bring back a specimen. And at this point, Andrews is kind of like still skeptical, but he's like, the guy in charge here just brought up the MDW to me, so this might be a thing. So he's like, yeah, like, if I see one, I'll try and bring it back, which is kind of a stupid thing to say because if you touch it, you die.
All I'm thinking of, though, is the fact that earthworms kind of just dry up in the sun and they shrivel up into nothing.
Well, this is obviously not an earthworm. And there are some worms that live in the desert. So they obviously are completely different. They don't rely on moisture.
Okay.
They have like a completely different like way to live. They have a carapace as opposed to like whatever earthworms have.
Okay.
So that's why people aren't
gross.
exactly sure what this thing could be. So he tells the Mongolian prime minister, like, cool, if I find one, I'll bring it back.
So it's kind of like a millipede.
I don't know. It doesn't have legs, though. It's supposed to be a worm. So he makes mention of it in another book of his as well that is published in the 30s. And he basically states that this thing, and he's had enough of this culture at this point where he's heard about like the legend and he knows where it's supposed to be. And he makes mention that it's supposed to live in, quote, the most arid, sandy regions of the Western Gobi. So if you're looking to avoid it, now you know where not to go. And I think most of you can handle that. So the other work that I came across that needs to be mentioned in much more detail is a book called, quote, The Beasts That Hide from Man, Seeking the World's Last Undiscovered Animals.
Wow.
And I think this title speaks for itself, and I really don't have to inform you what this book is about. That said, it's by a man named Carl Shuker, Shuker. If you want to look for it on Amazon, it's like $20 for paperback, $30 for hardback, $10 on Kindle. The Mongolian deathworm is not only covered, but it has around 50 pages of information in this book, and it's good shit. Like, he interviewed a bunch of people. He also talked to a bunch of people who have gone on expeditions, one of which was actually going on an expedition to find this thing. And so these 50 pages start out with, like, accounts of people who have seen it, and then theorizes what it could possibly be based off of, like, what creatures it resembles, what creatures could exist in that world, and the abilities that it has, and what creatures, like, in the wild actually might have that, like, ability. So it was really fascinating to read, and I'm going through this whole thing, and I'm like, okay, now I know this is going to be my topic for the week, and just this thing. So Shuker claims in his book that the MDW, quote, lives in desolate sand dunes in the hot valleys of the Gobi Desert with plants underground. And the plant specifically that it lives near is the Saxual, and I don't know how to say this right, but it is spelled Saxaual. So,
does it have that sexual feeling?
Every time I Google this thing to try and figure out what the hell it's called, it just kept giving me Urban Dictionary definitions. And I'm like, I'm not even going to read this shit. I have an idea of what it's already going to tell me. But the Saxual plant is actually like a specific type of tree that basically looks like the saddest pine tree you've ever seen. Like, Charlie Brown's Christmas tree looks better than these things. Like,
what?
It's like, imagine like really like if you just like make a circle with your hand that you can like look through with your eye, like when you're doing fake binoculars.
Yeah.
That thickness of like a root that looks like it's just the driest root in the world, and there's like 4 or 5 of them coming up from the ground, and then they like meet and it forms like this super sad pine tree that barely has any needles. So that's what this tree looks like, and it supposedly lives near these in particular more than anything else, which is just like kind of bizarre, but it's nice to know that if you see the tree, you should stay away from it because there might be some killer Mongolian deathworm there. So he has his own research with locals, and he also talks to another guy in particular named Ivan Mackerel, and I'm just going to call him Ivan because I don't want to keep saying his full name. But that's the dude who went on the worm hunt, and he went in the early 90s, and this book came out in the late 90s. So it's not like this is like a lifetime ago like the other dude. This is, 20 years ago, however long it's been.
Holy mackerel.
I hate you. They found this correlation between Mongolian deathworm sightings and this plant. And what's interesting here is that this plant actually grows near its roots a poisonous plant of its own. And that poisonous plant is like extremely poisonous. So when I read that, I was like,
could it be that people think it's a worm, but it's actually the root of this plant?
Or maybe they see some sort of other creature and then they get pricked by this plant and they're like, oh my God, I got poisoned. It must have been the Mongolian deathworm or something like that. But yeah, like I thought of that too, where it's like there's a bunch of different things that people might be mistaking for it. And then I started reading some of like the first-hand accounts that they were able to capture and record. So one of those first-hand accounts states that, quote, when the worm attacks, it raises half of its body up through the sand, inflates itself, and secretes a bubble of poison from one end, ultimately squirting it forth in a stream at its unfortunate victim.
That's disgusting.
So basically 2.5 feet of worm pop out, engorge, and then just spray all over you.
And it's not a snake.
It's not a snake, according to this, but we're going to get to some of the people who postulate what it could be. And we can all picture what that looks like when this thing comes out. Basically, it's this giant sand penis that pops out and sprays you with worm jizz. But what's important here is that whatever it touches, whatever its venom touches, turns yellow instantly and begins to corrode as if it has been touched by
like acid? Okay.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, so we're talking about like a xenomorph now, not just a graboid. So this thing is getting super interesting. And if you're wondering, can worms really squirt like that?
Sea cucumbers can.
What's a sea cucumber?
It's like it looks like a cucumber, but it's a creature that lives in the water, and if you squeeze it, it like squirts.
But yeah, you're right. Like you're saying, the answer is yes. And there are worms called, and I shit you not, they are called this, squirter earthworms.
Squirts McGurts.
And they can shoot their goo 18 inches.
Giggity goo.
And as a side note, again, yuck. So the same chick that was interviewed in this first-hand account says that if you meet the Mongolian deathworm in the second half of the year after June, that the worm isn't as poisonous and you won't necessarily die. At this point, I thought to myself, these things have as many rules as gremlins, and I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. And I guess not necessarily gremlins, but mogwai. I don't know. I haven't seen that movie
Just
in a long
don't feed
time.
them after midnight.
That's all you have
or
to
get
do.
them wet after midnight.
There's a lot of fucking rules. Okay.
I don't know. I've never seen that movie.
That said, when Ivan was on his expedition, and he was on this in the 90s, his interpreter that he had with him told him a personal story about the worm. His interpreter told him that when he was a child, there was a party of geologists that had visited the region, because apparently the Gobi Desert is a place where American and British scientists go to all the time.
Well, is it like Madagascar, where certain animals live in the Gobi Desert that you can't find anywhere
like the
else?
Mongolian deathworm? It would appear so. But one of these scientists was really super bored, and like, you know, you would be bored as shit in the middle of the desert, and he was sitting there poking the sand with an iron rod that they had, which was a piece of their equipment. And while poking the sand, he just fell off his seat onto the ground, and they ran over there, and they're like, "Oi, you okay, mate?"
Oh my goodness.
And that's my Mongolian accent for those of you who don't know. But he replied with silence because he was dead.
Wow.
So the ground by where he had been poking started to churn a bit, and they looked over, and out poked a big fat worm that was blood red. And it was like, "Oh, shit, dog, my bad." And then the worm left because he didn't mean to kill him. So the people who were near him at the time stated that they didn't see it spray him and that he had only touched it with the rod. He had never actually touched it with his hand. So he was basically telling them, like, they can kill you other ways than spraying you or by touching you. And the story is probably fake, but still, it's some creepy shit. And I put it in here.
Did the rod conduct something?
I put it in here for a reason, and we're going to get there. And this leads me to this next part about the MDW. It said that multiple people claim just being in close proximity can be risky, not just because of the squirts McGurts, but because you can get electrocuted as well. And when I read that at first, it just seemed like another detail tossed into this legend about this creature that probably doesn't exist. But when you take into account the story of a guy who died randomly after touching the thing with a metal rod, it kind of seems like, well, if it does exist and that story's true, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. And that's what I really like about this second book that I read, is it doesn't treat it as like skepticism. It treats it as, if this creature exists, why would it have these abilities? But then it looks at it like, if it does have these abilities, does this give us clues to the identity of what it could truly be?
How would, evolution-wise, this worm get all these crazy abilities? You know,
I'm going to break down some of them. Like,
okay.
Worms can squirt. We know that. So can snakes. Lots of things can projectile vomit poisonous jizz. Or venomous jizz, as it would be known. I'm going to go to the poisonous venomous description in a second here. We're going to get to that. But we know a lot of things can projectile. We know a lot of things like
I'm
are
just
poisonous
thinking
when you
about
touch
that
them.
dinosaur in Jurassic Park.
That's a little bit different, but that's, yeah, when Newman gets sprayed in the face with the tar jizz, that part's really scary. So each one of these abilities is something you actually see in nature. And these stories go on, and there's all these bizarre deaths in the desert with no apparent cause, but it turns out that it's poisoning or electricity. And there's always claims of these big fat red worms in the vicinity. And these stories come from people who traveled the region with various purposes, not just the locals.
What if they're like Pokemon?
I hate you.
And they're all like, they all have different abilities. You know what I mean?
You didn't know that Diglett could do this? Yeah, this is what happens before it becomes a Doug Trio. You don't want to see a Doug Trio version of the Mongolian Deathworm, just saying.
No, but I'm serious. Like, what if they all have different abilities?
Well,
you know
realistically,
what I mean?
if this is a creature that lives underground and only comes up for a couple months of the year to sunbathe, because there's a couple creatures that actually do that in the Gobi Desert, they come up and they lay on the sand during the hottest months of the year, which just happen to be June and July.
And then they take the heat back down with them.
They just come up to chill, I guess. I don't know. I don't actually didn't read up on the reason they do it. I just read up that there's different species that are subterranean that come up during the hottest months of the year and sunbathe, which seems like the opposite of what you would do if you're subterranean, but that's what they do. So and also June and July are the months that people see these things the most.
What?
Yeah. So it's like, there's clues to this that it could be something real. And also the fact that people say that they've seen it, but a lot of people that claim that they've seen it are really just like, I saw someone die for no reason, and I saw some big fucking worm, and I think that might be the cause. But that's not like the end of the stories. There's actually a bunch of these things. Like one dude claims he was there with his friend exploring for various purposes, and while they were riding on horseback, he heard his friend's horse cry out. And he looked back and he saw the horse collapse, and it dumped his friend on the sand. His friend got up and went to check on the horse, and then he screamed. So this guy ran over there to see what was going on. And at this point, I just picture the guards in the video game GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64,
oh my gosh,
where it's just like a dead body on top of a dead body, and then you run on top of that dead body to check. But he didn't die. He just went over there, and he saw his friend on the ground and this horse on the ground, and a big fucking red worm burrowing under the sand and getting away. And his friend and the horse, of course, were both dead. So the stories just keep going and keep going. And it's probably why people of the region think it's legit. So if this thing exists, what is it? And that's why I really like the fact that this book doesn't just say, like, let's determine whether or not it exists. It tries to say, like, if something like this did exist, it's kind of like the Mythbusters science. Like, what could it be or what
plausible.
would it be? Like, you're trying to figure out how to replicate these results. Like, if I could create this creature based off of what I see in nature, what would it wind up being? Well, the easiest answer here, if you're asking what is it, is that it's something we've never seen before. It's some species of worm that we just haven't discovered because it's subterranean, and very few people go into this region to hunt specifically for it, and those that come across it are at risk of death if they see it. Or people won't believe them because they're like, you're just full of shit, which is what most skeptics do. They just say, like, there's no proof of that, therefore I don't believe in it. And when you say it's something where it's like, if you touch it, you die. If it sprays you, you die. If it zaps you, you die.
If he dies, he dies.
It just raises the red flags for most people. And some science folks called cryptozoologists, like I mentioned, have theorized that it could actually be another animal mistaken for a worm. And what's interesting about people who try to figure out what the creature could be, if it were real, is they have to take into account all these things that could just be legend or lore. Like, we know electric eels can generate shock from their body, like internally, and it can like legitimately harm a human severely or kill animals at same size in the water, you know? So even though an electric eel can do this, that thing is underwater. So I was thinking, like, how the F would a 5-foot worm-like creature pull this off? And remember how I said that this thing keeps being seen churning in the dirt before it runs away? The people that wrote this book decided this might be a clue. And they researched and found a study that was done in 1994, the same time this book was being written. And this study was done by 2 doctors in the U.S. who were studying rattlesnakes. And they found that when a rattlesnake shakes its tail, it actually generates a charge.
What?
Yeah, it generates an electrostatic charge. And when they found that, that's what their study was what are they using it for? Is it incidental, or is it something like they're trying to find prey this way or affect their prey this way to like make their hair stand on end or whatever the case may be? But when they studied it, they realized that the agitated rattling, which is like super rapid rattling versus just like the standard rattling, can generate charges ranging from, and I don't know if this like figure is accurate. I wasn't able to find the exact study, just the reference to the study, but they said ranging from 50 to 100 volts of potential energy. And so maybe this thing isn't like an eel where it happens internally, but it's something externally through like churning in the sand or rattling of some sort.
I was going to say, like, because if it moves super fast through the sand, maybe it builds up that charge.
And there's just no rattle to warn anything about it. So it's just this really smooth thing that can still create like...
It's like an electric eel where you don't hear it. It just shocks you.
Eels do it like by tensing up their muscles and releasing the shock, though. This is like an external reaction, which is just really weird because it's basically this blood boner in the ground that can electrocute you.
Oh my God.
But like still getting enough charge to kill a person or a horse for that matter still seems super far-fetched to me, but it's kind of cool to know it is possible for something like this to happen. But if a dude, say, was poking it with a metal rod, maybe it was just enough to hit him in the right manner to stop his heart and kill him. You know, and like without getting too much into the science of it, of course I Googled, can 100 volts kill a person? And I found out that volts aren't the best way to measure it. They say the voltage really doesn't matter. It's the current that kills you. And they've done a bunch of measurements. And I remember them doing this on Mythbusters too, where they put like something like in the center of like a ballistic gel dummy to see whether or not you would actually be able to be killed by a bunch of household items. And items with voltages of 110 or lower have been said to be like lethal in certain situations. And holding like a conductor that's made of metal in your hand that's only like a couple of feet from your heart, yeah, that might work. So I'm going to stamp this one plausible. Just saying. I'm going to put on my like giant hat or my stupid hat and my mustache or whatever. He
doesn't have a stupid hat.
He has the Indiana Jones hat. Like, don't even try and split hairs with me on that.
It's not an Indiana Jones hat.
He wants to be Indiana Jones so bad.
He wears a French
beret. No, you're talking about the other one. I'm talking about Adam Savage, who totally wears the Indiana Jones hat.
I'm talking about Jamie.
Okay, we're talking about different Mythbusters.
Jamie has a mustache. Adam doesn't.
We have to go check pictures of these guys now.
I love them, though.
I do too. They're amazing human beings, and I wish they'd get their show back. I think they just stopped doing it, but still, I want them to do their show again. So, what the hell do people think this thing actually is? The general consensus by the scientific community, who will even consider the possibility that the Mongolian deathworm exists, decided to say that it's probably just a snake. And if you go to the Wikipedia page, it has a picture of a snake, and it's like, this is what it really is. But here's where my skepticism of the skeptics kicks up. Because I do my research, and I want to see whether or not this suggestion makes any sense. So we're going to get into it. It's claimed that the specific type of snake that is mistaken to be the MDW is the Tartar sand boa. And at first glance, I totally understand why they would pick this creature, because although it's a snake and it has scales and the general appearance of a snake, especially its body, its head and tail come to fairly blunt, rounded points, and there's no neck whatsoever. So it basically looks like a giant scaly sausage on the ground.
Okay.
And there's no viper head like you would associate with other snakes. It looks like a scaly worm, to be honest. And they grew up to around 4 feet in length. And
so
that's
pretty long.
It's about like the range of what it should be, because 2 to 5 is like the Mongolian deathworm. I went with 5 because that's like the most exaggerated form of it that everyone talks about. But for those of you who know a little bit about snakes, you probably already worked this out. There's a major problem with this particular snake being considered the culprit. It's a boa. And boas aren't venomous. They're constrictors, absolutely. And as a side note, I put this in here. If something bites or stings you or in any manner has to inject its toxin into you, it's venomous. If you can eat or drink something and it releases its harmful toxins into you, then it's poisonous. And you are now ready to go correct people who call snakes poisonous. And then it gets weird because there's certain frogs that shoot things at you, but if you also touch them, they're poisonous. So it's just, there's a bunch of ways you can split hairs. But snakes basically are venomous, not poisonous. So if the skeptic's best explanation for a 5-foot bloody worm that kills you if you touch it or it spits on you is a snake with 0 venomous or poisonous characteristics, I call bullshit on them calling bullshit, because that just seems lazy to me. And if that's not enough, consider this. I told you where these things like to hang out, right? I told you like the most arid parts of the Gobi Desert, like in the middle of nowhere by this plant that only seems to grow in the most desolate, sandy places. As we all know, Eryx tartaricus, which is, of course, the scientific name for the Tartar sand boa, is like most quote-unquote sand boas.
I want to know what it was named after.
It doesn't actually like sandy deserts.
What?
Just because it's called a sand boa doesn't mean it's actually going there. It actually likes dry grasslands, which is what's so funny about this thing being considered like the culprit. It wouldn't even be in the region that the Mongolian deathworm is. In fact, the local state governments near Mongolia and Central Asian countries that keep records on this snake state that it's found in mountain foothills, not the desert, not even semi-desert terrain. So it's just lazy science that they're just like, oh, well, this thing's obviously
they
this
just want
snake
an easy answer
that looks like a worm. It's because they don't believe it. And just because they don't believe it, they find a way where they can just discredit it. Like, we're never going to research it. We don't even care about it. We're just going to say that it's this snake that kind of looks like a giant sandworm.
All right.
And then they just dismiss it. And on top of that, that thing isn't even red. And the defining characteristic of the Mongolian deathworm is that it's supposed to be red. Some people say it has splotches on it, but it's like blood red. But hey, we're never going to know, because none of us are ever going to go.
Maybe the splotches means it's just blushing. It's like, he found me.
Oh my God, I'm so excited.
Oh,
Give me a hug. I'm sorry I spit on you, Dad. Oh, no, you're dead. So we're never going to know, because none of us are ever going to go study the Mongolian deathworm. But I really feel like this creature has potential to be like the giant or colossal squid, where it's fake. No one believes in it right up until they discover it, and everyone's like, well, obviously it was real this whole time. Obvi. So if you're in the Gobi Desert, you're probably best served not going near any plants that look like Christmas trees. And if you have to be there, you need to take Kevin Bacon and or Fred Ward with you. Otherwise, you are probably going to die.
Oh, I get it. Tremors joke.
Exactly. And Fred Ward is obviously the guy who's the older dude in Tremors. So, yeah.
The one with all the guns?
No,
I don't know.
Kevin Bacon's sidekick, who's like afraid of the stampede at the beginning of the movie. Nothing. I'll let you off the hook, but that is the Mongolian deathworm, and I hope you enjoyed it.
So, thank you for that. That's great. I'm going to go into my topic. That is mermaids.
Never heard of them.
Oh, you've never heard of them?
No.
All right, let's go.
They're no Mongolian deathworm, that's for sure.
Yeah. So this week,
Do they spit in your face?
I'll spit in your face right now. This week, thanks to a lovely spooky friend that posted something, I think in the Scariest Facebook group or on the Discord, but inspired me to do mermaids, because that's such a good idea. And it was just, I was like, why haven't I thought of doing that before? You know what I mean? So it was really cool.
It's funny because when we think of topics for the show, sometimes we're worried like, oh my God, I can't think of anything. And there's so many things out there that we haven't thought of. So suggestions are always super, super welcome.
Yes. Going over mermaids, I'm not going to go over those teen angsty redheaded ones that want to be with them landlubbers and grow legs and crap.
Did you see that meme that's like comparing Moana and Ariel from The Little Mermaid?
No.
And it's like, how dare you compare Moana to Ariel? Like, Moana left to save her people and her island and the land and the sea. Ariel left to get some dick.
What? Oh my God.
I was like, I loved Little Mermaid when I was a kid growing up, but that's totally true. Like, 100% on Moana's side on that argument.
And I'm not going to go over the ones that fall in love with Tom Hanks either.
Splash.
If you guys have never seen Splash, you guys should watch it. I liked it.
It has Tom Hanks in it.
It does have Tom Hanks in it, and he's so charming. Tom Hanks is so charming. And
every time I hear Tom Hanks, I think of The Money Pit. I know it has nothing to do with this.
I love The Money Pit.
It's just such a good movie. I saw it when I was a kid. I absolutely love that movie. If you've never seen The Money Pit, it's like an 80s flick. And
same thing with Splash.
It's just really good, man. It's really funny, and I just love the movie.
It's just
so
young Tom Hanks. Like, in these movies, it's probably because we're a different generation that we're into these movies, but you guys should check it out. Try and watch it. It's pretty good. I personally love mermaids, and I probably don't love them as much as Ariel fans do, you know what I mean? Or people that are just like, I need to have mermaids, everything. Mermaid scale, this and that, and shiny things. And I like them, okay? I just am not... Like, you won't find mermaid prints and mermaid notebooks and stuff like that.
So you're saying you don't have a sleeping bag that's a mermaid tail?
Do you?
No.
I would love a blanket that's a mermaid tail, though.
I want the Tauntaun sleeping bag from Empire Strikes Back.
I like the crochet mermaid tails that you can, like the blankets that you can get. You can sit around in a mermaid tail. Those are kind of cute. Anyway... Not a lot of people think about the darker origins of mermaids, and I personally love that part the most because I love weird, creepy things and have a morbid fascination with murder and stuff.
Because you daydream about luring men to their bloody deaths.
Mermaids are definitely no exception to having a dark side. Different cultures have different folklore or traditions, and we're going to learn about some of them today because there are a lot. And I definitely steered away from adding too much about sirens in there because I think sirens should be their own topic entirely.
What's funny is I was totally interested to hear if like mermaids were sirens or if they were like different things. So you saying that makes me think now like, oh wow, like we get to do research on sirens too. I think you're going to have to do it because since you're going to have all this mermaid expertise, you can really illustrate the difference between the two of them.
I am not going to do it right away though. I'm probably going to put off sirens till way later. I want to do like a haunted house next or something. So going into basic things about mermaids, the word mermaid is derived or comes from a compound of Old English, probably like the font, but not really. I don't know where that font actually comes from, but it's called Old English. Have you ever used it before?
No.
It's all like fancy looking.
Favorite font? What's your favorite font right now, Robin? Toss it out there.
ISOCEUT.
It's the scariest font, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the scariest font.
My favorite is Times New Yorker, which makes it look like the New Yorker newspaper print.
But
so it makes it look like
Times
New
New
Yorker letters, not Times New Roman. No, it's completely different because like it has this just like really like weird kind of like cryptic look to it. Like it looks kind of messy, but at the same time it looks like a newspaper print.
All right.
I don't know. It's my favorite. It's a weird thing to have a favorite font.
Yeah, I love the scariest font. That's my favorite. That and Red and Sec. I use Red and Sec a lot too.
It's weird that we have favorite fonts, but I'm glad that you're as big of a nerd as I am.
So the word mermaid comes from mer, meaning sea, and maid, which you can guess is a young girl, like a young woman or a girl. And it just made me think like, okay, well, what does an older mermaid look like? Because you never see older mermaids, right?
I imagine they're just sitting there smoking cigarettes.
Oh my. All I know is all the pictures that I've seen, okay, maybe not all, but a lot of the pictures I've seen are women mermaids that look like Ariel. They're just young women, and it's just weird. And
I have questions, but I'm going to save them and let you keep going.
Well, does Triton count as a mermaid?
Triton, like her
King
dad?
Triton, yeah.
He's a merman.
But he's like a god, so does that count?
Well, he's a god because of his trident, right?
I don't know.
I mean, isn't that the whole point? Like Ursula's trying to get the trident from the king, and like she takes her voice because she knows the king will show up and be like, give me my daughter's voice back. And she's like, give me the trident. And he
We'll
does.
totally get into the story of the Little Mermaid later.
Okay.
So,
See, all I really know about mermaids, aside from the Little Mermaid plot, is like men thought that manatees were mermaids, or that's like the theory behind it. Are you going to get to that? Because I don't want to spoil anything.
yeah,
You're gonna
okay,
I'll stop there then.
So, as you can guess, or if you already know, mermaids are aquatic beings with heads and top halves being human, and instead of having legs, they have a large fishtail instead.
So hot.
So hot. I'm just like, where did things go? I don't even know.
My Mongolian death worm is getting excited.
Ew, gross. Okay. They're usually, they're usually drawn as beautiful women with long flowing hair and are just like these seductresses of the sea. Like they're always drawn super hot. I don't know why, but they are. And of course there are mermen, but they pretty much coexist with each other. So I'm kind of gonna lump them into together as like mermen, mermaids. They're together kind of thing.
I figured they're just mer people or murlocs.
I'm pretty good at that.
You do it all the time.
Okay. But I know it's super rude for the mermen, but a lot of sources, well, okay, maybe not a lot. A few of the sources that I came across say that mermen are wilder and uglier than mermaids. And mermen just don't give two craps about people.
So they're not trying to lure anyone to their death. They're
No.
just ugly, and they're like, everyone leave me alone.
I guess so. I felt really bad when I read that. I was like, that's mean.
Poor
Who wrote
merman.
that? Many historical accounts have mermaids being inspired by or being themselves sirens of Greek mythology. And when I saw that, I was like, okay. But then I read into sirens more, and sirens have like wings and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, sirens are their own thing. I'm going to research them as their own thing because they don't look the same. So if they don't look the same, they're probably two completely different creatures.
The similarity is just luring men to their death. But sirens use their song, right?
Yes.
And mermaids, do they sing?
No.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's an important distinction. That is good to know.
Yeah. So, I mean, they could. Ariel sings. She wants to be up there with all the people.
Every time I hear that song from Little Mermaid, I think of the Far Superior song, which is sang by sang by Satan in the South Park movie. I fucking love that movie.
So it's thought that those reported by Christopher Columbus might have actually been the manatees, like you were saying, or a similar creature like sea life, something.
What's really creepy, and like I get it, it's a bunch of dudes on a boat for a very long time. A lot of them don't know, especially in Christopher Columbus's case, if they're going to see land again. And maybe they get somewhere near land, a rocky shore, and they see like a manatee, and they're like, look at that super hot chick in the water. And I'm just saying, it is possible in the history of mankind that one dude was so horny enough that he tried to, and maybe succeeded in, having sex with a manatee. And if that did happen, I think we have our explanation from where mermaids came from. I'm just saying.
It's gross. Well, all I know is Christopher Columbus came to a country and was like, bro, you India? You're Indians now. You're Indians. And
are you stealing the Louis C.K. joke about that?
There's a Louis C.K. joke
That's
about
his
it?
joke, yeah.
Oh, well, all I know is he was like, man, those are mermaids. But they were probably manatees. And he was like,
he just named
man,
shit
you're
wrong.
Indians. Yeah. So, I don't know. Salty, but whatever. He reported seeing, quote unquote, female forms that rose high out of the sea, but were not as beautiful as they were depicted.
So he saw manatees, basically.
Yeah. I'm just like, come on, man. Like, no one believes you anymore. Just shut your mouth. In the time between 1870 and 1890, as well as a time in 1967, there were sightings in Canada near Vancouver and Victoria. And there were a number of sightings in the Susquehanna River in June of in 1881. So Canada seems to have sightings of mermaids.
It's weird that they would be in rivers, too. Do you think there's freshwater mermaids and saltwater mermaids?
Well, I did, as I was doing research, some said that mermaids have been known to go up rivers and into lakes and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, it happens. We're talking about a creature no one even knows exists, okay? Or thinks
It's like how we were debating whether or not the dragons in Game of Thrones, like, do you think the one dragon that breathes blue fire is breathing like really hot fire or like ice? And it's like everyone knows that really hot fire is blue, and it's like a blue flame is hotter than a red flame. It's like, yes, let's apply science to fucking dragons.
Anyway, so an anthropologist by the name of A. Asbjorn Jon, I'm going to assume that's how you say it. I don't know.
You got to toss out nicknames for these guys. That's what I do.
Well, he's going to be called Bjorn now because I don't ever say his name anymore. Anyway, okay, this is a quote from what he wrote. Quote, "These marine beasts have featured in folk tradition for many centuries now, and until relatively recently, they have maintained a reasonably standard set of characteristics. Many folklorists and mythographers deem that the origin of the mythic mermaid is a dugong, posing a theory that mythicized tales have been constructed around early sightings of dugong by sailors," end quote. And when I read that, the only thing that popped into my mind was Pokemon.
I knew you were going to go Pokemon.
Because now Dugong's name makes sense because I did not realize that was an animal. I was just like, majestic seal, and they named it a dugong. I don't know.
Now that you've discovered your new favorite animal, describe what a dugong is.
So a dugong is just like a manatee, but it's like, I don't know, looks more slim than a manatee.
It's a skinnier version. It's a manatee on a diet.
But it's a sea cow, just the same.
Okay.
So,
sea cow seems like a mean term.
I don't know. You think you could milk it?
No, I don't. You can milk anything with nipples.
Okay.
That's a meet the parents joke right there. I just busted out for you folks.
Oh, okay.
I apologize.
But yeah, no. So I had no idea. Now the Pokemon dugong looks nothing like the real life dugong. I don't know. The Pokemon looks way more majestic. But they're all cute. You know what I mean? Whatever.
It's no Blastoise. That's all I know.
I'd boop it. So I even read that this creature called the dried skate has also been described as a mermaid because of its human-like appearance. And in Europe, they're sometimes called the devilfish, apparently, because if you look at this thing, it just looks horrifying and evil. It has two tails that kind of looks like legs, and then it has a long tail that makes it look like it's devil tail, you know what I mean? And then the underbelly of it just looks like a head and like really beefy shoulders and a torso, and its face is just so creepy looking. So when you post on Instagram tomorrow, I'll make you post a picture
yeah.
Because it's so creepy. In Mexico, these dried skates are even believed to have magical powers and used in healing rituals. And as an Asian, I totally believe that some creatures are used for certain rituals because, hello, why not? I mean, other than, like, please don't kill sharks and stuff. And,
I like how you point out, like, these creatures are used in rituals, but you didn't say whether or not you think those rituals are actually real or they actually work.
Well, okay, so growing up, my mom used to make this, like, soup. Not really a soup because I don't think we ever drank it. But when I was sick, she'd put all these things into a pot of water and would boil it up, and then she'd make me tent myself under a blanket and just breathe in the fumes if I were sick.
So it's like icy hot, but like homemade icy hot.
What?
Really? You've never heard of icy hot?
Isn't that just a patch you put on your body?
Yeah, but I mean, like, I'm thinking of icy hot because it's something you put on like sore muscles, but like, what is like Vicks Vapor Rub that you could put on like someone's chest so that they could breathe when they're like sick too? It's like similar to that.
Well, this thing is a pot that's steaming. So you put a pot of steaming stuff and then you make a tent over the pot. And so it's just steaming and you're breathing. It's like a sauna that you're sitting in. And you're just breathing in this medicinal...
Sounds like your mom was trying to kill you. I'm just saying.
Well, you're breathing in this medicinal steam. I don't know. But that's... So I believe that some rituals may be a thing. But I don't know if these creatures are rare. You know what I mean? If they're rare, then I'm like, what? That's kind of a bad thing because you don't want to make them go extinct over these rituals.
Well, they said they use them in the ritual. Do they catch them and then release them? I'd like to think that maybe they do something like conservationist like that.
I would think they're like, slit its throat. But who knows? I don't do these rituals. I don't know. But in certain European folklore, mermaids are called Melusine and depicted as having two fishtails or a serpent booty. And I feel like at that point, it wouldn't be a mermaid so much as something else entirely, which is, again, why I didn't do sirens. Because once it looks different like that, I'm like, maybe it's something else and it should have its own episode or something like that. But
agreed.
Who knows? I think the serpent booty thing's kind of cool. mermaids have seriously been depicted for ages. There have been depictions of them in artwork from the old Babylonian period in Mesopotamia, which is old, like 1800s BC old. So if we're, what are we now? 2019 AD. So that's a long
almost as
time
far away
ago.
from Jesus as we are now, just
Yes.
further back.
Yeah, and that is one of the rare times that mermen were actually more prominently depicted.
Really?
Yeah. There was a mer god called Era who was half man, half fish, and then Syrians took that and mixed it with their own and then created what's called the Derketo, which is their own mermaid person. A writer by the name of Lucian of Samosata, which when I read that, I was like, you might as well just call yourself Cher or Shakira. Like,
why?
because his name's Lucian of Samosata.
But it's
like,
Lucian. How does
what's
that
his
match
last
Cher?
name?
Just because they have a single name doesn't mean that they have to be Cher or
You can
Shakira.
just call yourself Prince. Okay.
Okay, that works.
He wrote about Syrian temples that he visited during the 2nd century AD. And he wrote, quote, I saw Derketo's likeness in Phoenicia, a strange marvel. It is a woman for half its length, but the other half, from thighs to feet, stretched out in a fish's tail. But the image in the holy city is entirely a woman, and the grounds for their account are not very clear. So he's saying, like, I don't know if it's real because it's supposed to be just a chick, but they're saying that it's half chick, half fish. Continuing on. They consider the fish to be sacred, and they never eat them. They eat all other fowl, but they do not eat the dove, for they believe that it's holy. These things are done, they believe, because the Derketo and the Semiramis, because the Derketo has the shape of a fish, and ultimately the Semiramis turned into a dove. This is kind of confusing because there's a different story where the Semiramis turns into a fish, but whatevs. I'm not an ancient Greek or whatever, so I'm like...
You're not a theologian and can study all these
so I'm
things.
like, lean with it, rock with it, whatever you say, man.
I hate you so much.
So the first known stories of these mermaids appeared around 1000 BC in Assyria. And the story in Assyria goes like this. The goddess known as Atargatis, I don't know, mother of the Assyrian queen Semiramis, fell in love with a mortal and accidentally killed him. Heartbroken over what she had done, she jumped into a lake and took over the form of a fish. Okay, so it's the mom that turned into a fish, not the queen herself. Okay, so that's why. Maybe the queen herself turned into a dove, but the mom was the fish. She jumped into the lake, took over the form of a fish, but because she was too beautiful to hide, ended up taking the form of a mermaid as we know it. Fish downstairs, human bits up top. There are early depictions of her, though, having mostly being fish with the head of a human. So that's way creepier than having top half human, bottom half fish.
Yeah. That's less desirable than like, yeah, there's, no legs and there's a fish bottom, but she's got some titties. Then it's just like, wow, it's a fish body with a head on there. Definitely far less sexy.
Imagine fishing and catching that.
Christopher Columbus would be like, God damn, she's so hot.
Ew, he's such a weirdo. A popular Greek legend tells of Alexander the Great's sister turning into a mermaid, and her name was Thessaloniki? I don't know. I don't speak this language. But she was turned into a mermaid after she died and lived in the Aegean Sea. And now this part of the lore is kind of like the Slipmouth Woman, where you got to answer her question carefully and correctly. She would ask sailors of ships that encountered her only one question. Is King Alexander alive? And if you answered correctly with, he lives and reigns and conquers the world, she would calm the waters and let you on your merry way. And if you answered incorrectly, she'd bring up a storm and murder everyone at sea.
Does anyone else get anxiety when Robin says, like, you have to answer these questions correctly? Like, oh God, do I need to take notes? Is this going to be on the test?
You just got to carry rice with you and just chuck it.
I can just imagine this mermaid asking me a question, and I throw rice in her face. I'm like, did I pass? And she murders me and everyone else.
In British folklore, mermaids are the devil, but not really. I mean, they're not actually the devil. They're just not lucky. and they're unlucky omens that foretell disaster, which is a lot different than a lot of the other stories or lore that I heard, or not heard, but read, because a lot of the other lore is like they help people or they're not necessarily murderers. You know what I mean? They're not unlucky.
Like they're benevolent, or they show
right.
up like when there's a shipwreck to help get men to like safety or something like that.
Yes, but the British folklore is like, nah, man, they bad.
They just straight up unlucky.
So they're unlucky omens that foretell disaster. There are several variants of this ballad called the Ballad Sir Patrick Spens that depict a mermaid speaking to doomed ships. Some say that she tells them they'll never see land again. They also seem to be a sign of rough weather. And maybe if they would just tell them that Alexander still rules, then she'll be like, oh, all right, you good, dog.
Let me calm this sea down for you really fast.
These mermaids are sometimes described to be huge, like 2,000 feet huge. And when I read that, I was like, I don't think that's right. There's no way.
That sounds more like a kraken to me. I'm just saying.
How could it possibly be that long? But then I'm like, imagine Ariel at 2,000 feet. And then when I thought that, I was like, maybe they just saw Ursula, because Ursula gets really huge at one time, right?
Also, huge titties.
Lots of tentacles.
Oh, God, you made it weird.
In another story from the British Isles, the Laird of Lornty went to aid a woman he thought was drowning in a lake near his home. One of his servants stopped him, warning him of the mermaid. Following this, the mermaid screamed at him and said she would have killed him if not for his servant, which is the equivalent of being like, I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you meddling kids.
Yep, that's pretty much it.
I was like, who says that?
I would have killed you if it weren't for that guy. It's like, that guy probably feels awesome. Like, I'm totally right. Oh my God.
He's like, get riggedy wrecked, slut. So, Blackbeard the pirate has been reported to have warned his crew on a number of occasions to steer away from enchanted waters for fear of merfolk and mermaids and murlocs.
Such a good guy, that Blackbeard.
Oh, wait, that's a turkey. I don't know.
They're getting worse.
So he and his crew had been reported actually having seen these things. Which again, I mean, guys at sea are like, I've been at sea for a really long time. Those manatees are starting to look real good. These mermaids, merfolk, they were said to be bad luck, bewitching them to give up their gold and dragging them to the bottom of the ocean. So the British Isles is just like, man, no, they're bad. Just don't do it. There's an African water spirit called the Mami Wata, who is half sexy lady, half fish, and is said to steal men from their homes and force them to love them, and then kills whoever doesn't please her. So if you ever run into one, just have some mirrors or combs on hand as a distraction, because they like those.
Wow, so they're vain? So they want to look at themselves?
Yeah.
What about dinglehoppers? Should I carry dinglehoppers with me? That's a Little Mermaid reference for those of you who haven't seen it in 25 years.
Thingamabobs. I hear she's got 20. In Korea, as a country that's surrounded on three sides by water, it's no wonder that they have stories of mermaids. They even have tales of an undersea kingdom of mermaids, which I thought was like, what? Koreans believe in that? That's kind of cool. In China, there's a tale of a mermaid who wept tears that became pearls. Other tales in China have people rescuing them and then taking them back to the water and then getting rewarded for what they do. There's no actual evidence of mermaids having existed outside of folklore, but that definitely hasn't stopped them from being popular in art and literature or depicted in movies or opera or comics or anything. And I think it's funny because there's probably never been a skeleton of a mermaid where it's like just a bunch of fish bones and then a human skeleton up top. You know what I mean? Unless they're like, there's no way these two things go together. It's not a mermaid.
It was a fish eating a woman. That's what it's got to be.
That'd be so crazy.
I mean, you'd find the bones of the woman's bottom half if that were the case.
Yeah,
unless the fish
true.
bit her in half, ate the bottom half, held on to the top half, shit out the bottom half, which then floated away, and then they died together. That is the only way that you would find that sort of skeleton.
So there's a collection of Middle Eastern folktales that you might have heard about called 1001 Nights, also known as Arabian Nights.
I was going to say.
And
I hear they're like Arabian Days.
I knew it. My next thing is like, all I hear is Aladdin, but you know.
You have to admit, you ain't never had a friend like me.
I love Aladdin. It's a good movie. I don't know about this new one coming out though. We'll see.
We'll see.
Will Smith, get it?
I knew you were gonna be like Will Smith. We'll see. I can't make this work as a pun. I'm just gonna throw it out there though. Fuck it.
So this Arabian Nights was translated into English in the 1700s, but it obviously existed longer than that before it was translated. And there are several tales of sea people in this collection of stories. And anatomically, these creatures in there were humans, but lived and breathed underwater. Ugh.
All I think about is the Futurama episode where Fry tries to have sex with a mermaid, and he's like getting ready to have sex with her. And she's like, so, I mean, I'm going to lay my eggs in the ground and then you just have to pass over them and fertilize them. And she's like, he goes, why couldn't I find the good mermaid where it's fish part on the top and lady part on the bottom? And that's fucking gross, folks.
So when I saw that, I was like, would the people of Atlantis have lived and breathed underwater? You know, if like...
So we're getting into Aquaman territory.
Well,
now.
that they would they have adapted to it soon enough, or would they have all just drowned?
They would have all just. You don't adapt in like a single lifetime. It takes many, many generations to adapt. Like if Atlantis sank and they were sinking with it, it wouldn't be like, oh, we're far enough down now. We all have gills. Everything's okay. There's never been a case where someone started drowning and they were spontaneously saved by gills.
It's like, whoa, I got gills. What? Did you already cover Atlantis?
No, I've not covered.
Okay.
I covered the bloop, which was like Cthulhu-ish in origin, and it also talked about how it might be near where Atlantis was, but Atlantis is supposed to be in the Atlantic Ocean, and that's the Pacific Ocean. I covered something similar to an underground city where it might be, but
all right. Okay, cool.
Not Atlantis specifically.
Well, maybe we'll cover it later, right?
At some point, we definitely have to cover it. Yeah.
These sea people can breed. I typed bread because I'm tired. But these sea people can breed with humans, and their kids can live underwater. So they
I'm gonna go ahead and raise that Futurama question again of how.
Which I think it's neat, but other than the Arabian Nights, there was The Little Mermaid, obviously, a movie made out of it. But it also started out as a book. So it was a story first, and then Disney was like, let's just butcher this like we did all the other ones.
I mean, Lion King is what, Hamlet? I think it's Hamlet. I can't remember exactly which Shakespeare tale Lion King actually is.
Anyway, so the Ariel story definitely isn't as nice and simple and rose-colored as Disney portrays it to be. In the end of Christian Andersen's tale, the one that wrote the original Little Mermaid, she dissolves into foam and transforms into a mortal soul doing good deeds in the world of men. So when I read that, I was like, what? Because this whole time I'm like, doesn't she marry the prince? Isn't that what's supposed to happen?
Doesn't she have to get kissed in 3 days in order to keep her legs?
So in
the girl.
In the book,
don't be shy.
There's like a knife that her sisters end up getting for her, and in order to get her voice and tongue back or something, she has to kill the prince, and she won't do it.
Jesus.
So she jumps into the ocean and dissolves into foam and turns into this ethereal being, and that's how the story ends. But
I'd like to see that in the live action remake of Little Mermaid.
So I had to add mermaids from the Isle of Man, of course, and they're known as Benberry, which is probably pronouncing it wrong, so Sam's gonna be like,
Sam's gonna let us know.
And they are considered favorable to humans, having accounts of assisting them and giving gifts and rewards. There's a story of a fisherman taking a mermaid back to sea and being rewarded with treasure. Then there's another story of a baby mermaid stealing a human baby and having the mother sending the baby mermaid back to return the child with a gift of a pearl as apology.
Like, yo, dog, sorry we kidnapped your kid. Here's some jewelry, though.
I just imagine the mermaid mom being like, what the F?
I imagine it was like my
Take
mom.
it back.
The first time I caught a wild animal and tried to bring it home. Me and my brother chased a wild bunny and were able to get it to jump into a box, and we took it home like, we have a pet bunny now. My mom's like, get it away from the house. It has fleas. And she yelled at us until we walked away and let it go and set it free.
Oh.
I imagine that's what this mermaid mom was like. Don't bring that animal into my house. It has fleas. Humans are disgusting creatures.
So let me try to end the weird, crazy, murderous mermaid things with a cuter story. So a mermaid came to the Cornish village of Zenner, where she used to listen to the singing of a man named Matthew Truella. Sounds like Cruella. I love that movie. That's my favorite Disney movie.
Is it?
101
Dalmatians?
Dalmatians.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not Mulan?
That's my second one. Mulan. I like Mulan too. So, the two fell in love, and he followed her to the sea. And on summer nights, they can be heard singing together, which I thought was super cute. And at the church...
What song do you think they sing? I'm picturing La Vie en Rose, like in the end of...
Under the Sea.
I hate you so much. I was going to say the end of How I Met Your Mother before they ruined the series.
At the church of Saint Sonara in Zenner, there's a chair decorated by a mermaid carving that is supposedly 600 years old. So
600 years old?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was like, that's pretty cool. I'd also like to say that mermaids may have gotten bad raps from being just oblivious to the human condition, and men would go in after them thinking that these mermaids were drowning, and then the men would drown themselves. And then mermaids would accidentally pull humans down into the water with them, forgetting that humans can't swim.
Maybe they were just like, oh, look at that weird mermaid that has those two fins. Let's take it and show it to people. And then it's like, oh, it's not moving anymore. Hey, wake up. Because if they looked the same from the top half up and they'd never met humans before.
Well, that's why they're like, they don't know that humans can't swim like they can and breathe underwater. And so unintentional drowning happens.
And dudes just trying to get laid, just jumping into the ocean that probably are probably exhausted and malnourished, might have trouble swimming to find these women. And if they're trying to chase them and these mermaids are like, get the hell away from me, you creep, and they swim away, I mean, eventually the man's going to tire out and just die, which, let's be real, that's probably a good lesson. Just let her go, bro. Don't be so creepy.
Let it go.
Oh my God.
Let it go. But yeah, that's mermaids.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm really happy that we actually covered the true tale of The Little Mermaid, which was clearly a documentary.
Yeah, dude, no, seriously, in the book...
You really think it was a documentary?
No. She cut her tongue off and became mute. She gave her voice and her tongue to the witch.
That's just so creepy.
Yes.
And gross.
So, hope you guys enjoy the super fun myth creatures and possibly real creature in your freaky worm thing.
The Mongolian death worm.
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows? It could be real. And mermaids could be real. Maybe we have podcast listeners who are mermaids. They make stuff that goes underwater now. I hope so. If so, tweet at us and give us a shout out and let us know.
Okay.
So, good stuff.
Don't get water on your phones.
Maybe they have one of those OtterBox cases that can go underwater.
A
mermaid with
cases.
an OtterBox case would be pretty funny. But yeah, so I think that was a pretty good episode 71. I hope you folks enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed learning about it. I'm very interested to have Robin come back and tell us about sirens in the future. I know you said you're not going to do it right away, but I am interested to know the difference between the two because apparently sirens have wings, you said?
Yeah, they're supposed to have wings.
Right on. Super interesting. So good stuff. And like we said before, if you have stories about, I'm not saying you have to have encounters with Mongolian deathworms or mermaids, but if you just have creepy, paranormal, spiritual, or funny stories, feel free to send them our way. Email storytime@scarish.com. You can message us at facebook.com/scarishpodcast or on Instagram @scarishpodcast, or you can tweet at us @scarishpod, or just go to our website, scarish.com, and click on Contact Us and send them that way. And thank you to everyone who supports us in every single way. We appreciate you, whether it's just listening to the show consistently, leaving a rating or review on iTunes, or donating to us. It all means so much to us. And Robin, for the folks that want to donate to us, how can they do so?
If you go to patreon.com/scarishpodcast, those are monthly donations, and we have a whole bunch of tiers. We even have tiers where I send out badges and magnets and stuff that I make, and stickers periodically. I am currently trying to design a new one. It's just been really busy trying to get ready for Level Up Expo and school and life and all these other things. But hopefully I can get out one to you guys this month or next month. Yeah. And then Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast. Those are one-time donations, and all those donations help us upgrade our studio setup. If you guys have watched our YouTube videos, you've seen us grow and seen the quality of our audio and video get better. So hopefully if you guys can help us out, that'd be great.
We appreciate all of it, and thank you so much for everyone that listens to us. I know I've said it before, and I know I say it every episode, but we truly, truly appreciate it. So one last time, thank you to all of our supportive fans, listeners, fan base, spooky friends, whatever. Really, spooky friends is the best thing, because it's like we all have this interest in the paranormal, and you guys are our friends, and we appreciate every single one of you. So I think that's just about everything we have for episode 71. So I'm going to take the sign out because I think you've done it the last two times. So keep on creeping on, and we will see you folks later this week.